Basketball is a beautiful game. It may not be the beautiful game, but it has its charm. One of the coolest aspects of following professional basketball and sports as a whole is the cause and effect events that slowly but surely unfold from season to season. The NBA is not a stranger to this phenomenon. I've already talked about the butterfly effect's implications on this channel regarding star trades that never happened, but what about the events that led to star trades? In this case, we'd have to go back to the 2005-2006 NBA season, a year of NBA basketball that featured David Stern's new dress code, the introduction of the Charlotte Bobcats, the first championship for the Miami Heat, and most importantly for this video, the second highest individual scoring performance in a game in NBA history. Of course, I'm referring to the match that transpired between the Toronto Raptors and the Los Angeles Lakers at Staples Center on January 22, 2006. The game where a 27-year-old Kobe Bryant put up an astounding 81 points in a winning effort to come back from an 18-point deficit to push the middling LA squad past the lowly Raptors. The highest scoring tally by a player in 44 years at the time, and one that has only been encroached upon in recent years by players like Luka Doncic, Joel Embiid, and Damian Lillard. While this game became one of the landmark historical moments in the near 80-year-old history of the NBA and is one of the staple highlights of Kobe Bryant's Hall of Fame career, they made a statue just for this performance. It also became a disconcerting footnote of the quality of Raptors basketball in the 2000s, as well as subjecting Jalen Rose to becoming an internal butt of the joke solely for being the most notable player on the floor wearing red that night, despite Kobe's eruption not falling solely on his responsibility. But what if I told you the implications of that fateful night? That the Black Mamba's crowning offensive performance inadvertently delivered Canada's first Larry O'Brien trophy. Let's break it down. While the 2006 Lakers had a mediocre regular season that put them at the 7th seed in the West at 45 wins, resulting in a first-round exit following a Game 7 thriller against MVP Steve Nash's Phoenix Suns, the Toronto Raptors are one of the worst teams in basketball, finishing with the 5th worst record and being one of 5 teams to not hit the 30-win mark that season. Their final record was exactly 27-55, finishing 4th in their division, only ahead of a depressing Knicks team headlined by Jamal Crawford, Eddie Curry, and 60 games of Stephon Marbury. Hey look, it's Jalen Rose again. That 27-win mark gave Toronto less than a 9% chance to grab the number 1 pick in the 2006 NBA Draft. Despite the Blazers winning a league-bottoming 21 games, giving them a 1-in-4 chance to receive the pick, they would end up being the biggest faller of the lottery, dropping to 4th. Meanwhile, in a momentous streak of luck, the Raptors would be rewarded what has remained as their only number 1 pick in franchise history. That demoralizing loss to Kobe that occurred at the exact halfway point of the season kicked off a 4-game losing skid for the Raptors, yet kept the team from ending up in a tiebreaker scenario with the Hawks and the Bobcats, who both had 26-win seasons and just under 14% odds. In a pretty weak 06 draft that was still able to house players like LaMarcus Aldridge, Brandon Roy, and ironically Rudy Gay and Kyle Lowry, the Raptors chose the 7-foot Italian native Andrea Bargnani with the pick. Bargnani was favorably considered to be the best player available for Toronto, coming off of his 3rd year playing professionally overseas in EuroLeague, where he averaged 11-5 on 48% shooting the campaign before entering the NBA. Bargnani spent his rookie season coming off the bench for Sam Mitchell, playing backup forward minutes, mostly for 22-year-old Chris Bosh, the silver lining of Raptors basketball at the time, who was having his best season in Toronto in that period. Bosh was an All-Star, an All-NBA second-team honoree, and finished 7th in MVP voting, averaging 22-10 and leading the team to the playoffs for the first time in his career. Despite being a reserve as the number 1 pick, Bargnani had a respectable rookie year. He put up 11-4 in 25 minutes a night and finished 2nd in Rookie of the Year voting. He even received one of the 128 first-place votes, blocking a unanimous crowning for Blazers star Brandon Roy. That first year would be the last time in his tenure that the Raptors would end the season above 500, and his sophomore year would be the last time he saw the postseason. Bargnani played 433 games as a Raptor, with his peak from 2009 to 2012, where he averaged 19-5 on 45, 35, and 81 splits, as Toronto would fall back into bottom feeder status as Bosh departed for Miami. Despite being a top pick, Bargnani never found any individual success either, and after a tumultuous 2012-13 season, where he was absent for a majority of the year managing an elbow injury, Bargnani was traded to the New York Knicks alongside a 2016 first-round pick swap in exchange for Marcus Camby, Steve Novak, Quentin Richardson, a 2014 second-round pick via OKC, New York's 2017 second-round pick, and cash. After about 100 games of meme-worthy basketball in New York City between the Knicks and the Nets, Bargnani would leave the NBA at 30 years old to rejoin the EuroLeague, closing a chapter in one of the quote-unquote draft busts of the league. But our story doesn't end there, as the assets from the trade would play a vital role. Defensive icon Marcus Camby, who was drafted a Raptor and played his first 2 seasons in Toronto, was swiftly waived following the trade as he was 38 years old. Quentin Richardson was also waived and would retire from basketball at 33 the following year. Beloved Knick Steve Novak only played 54 games with the Raptors in an end-of-bench role before being flipped again along with that Knicks second-round pick to the Jazz in exchange for Deontay Garrett. The star of the show would ultimately be the swapped first-round pick for 2016. Despite being the Knicks' pick, that pick was actually under Denver's positioning, as it was one of the many assets involved in a blockbuster transaction that made Carmelo Anthony a Knick. The Nuggets had the Knicks pick in that lottery, which ended up 7th, and gifted Denver with a guard out of Kentucky named Jamal Murray. Murray would, of course, become the championship second option for Denver and a star point guard in the league. The Nuggets pick ended up going 9th, where the Raptors would select Jakob Poeltl, an Austrian center who averaged 17-9 for the University of Utah in his sophomore year. The Raptors were looking for size, particularly a hole at the 4, and it was believed to be between Poeltl and Gonzaga sophomore, the Lithuanian Domantas Sabonis, which is another what-if for another day. Jakob played limited minutes in his rookie year, as Toronto was in a completely different space compared to the era of Bargnani by 2017. The team was now elevated to contention behind a Dwayne Casey-orchestrated effort with a roster headlined by DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry at the peak of their powers. In his second season, Poeltl played all 82 games, being a part of a beloved second unit for Toronto that season dubbed the Bench Mob, alongside DeLon Wright, Fred VanVleet, CJ Miles, Norman Powell, and Pascal Siakam. Jakob averaged just under 7 and 5 and just over a block a night in 18 minutes a game. He would even receive a third-place vote for Sixth Man of the Year. However, the Raptors would have a debilitating postseason in 2018, one that was the final straw in a nauseating stretch of playoff exits to the hands of LeBron James in his second stint with the Cleveland Cavaliers. During this stint of both record success and public embarrassment come spring, DeMar DeRozan had become the face of playoff underperforming. Kyle Lowry had ultimately proven to be a more valuable asset intangibles-wise, and Toronto's front office was willing to move their franchise's all-time leading scorer for an opportunity of a lifetime if it presented itself. On the other side of the league, MVP finalist and 2-time Defensive Player of the Year Kawhi Leonard was in the midst of a very public falling out with the San Antonio Spurs due to mismanagement of his quad injury that resulted in Leonard asking out of Texas. It was clear that Kawhi had his eyes set on his home market of Los Angeles, preferably the Lakers, where he would be paired up with the recently signed LeBron James. However, Leonard's fate, for at least one season, was in the hands of Greg Popovich and the Spurs front office, who didn't feel like they had to cater to Kawhi's preferences and were taking all offers to receive the best return possible for losing one of the era's defining players at 27 years old. Unfortunately for both parties, none of the interested teams were willing to part with their most valuable young assets fit for a Kawhi Leonard return. Philadelphia didn't want to part with either of their recent number 1 picks. Boston weren't willing to part with young Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum coming off of a stellar rookie postseason. And the Lakers were opposed to offloading Brandon Ingram. That left room for an unlikely suitor to become a heavy favorite, the Toronto Raptors. The trade market for Kawhi had become a barren desert, and a questionable oasis formed in Toronto. Bobby Webster and Masai Ujiri were willing to offer up DeRozan. While the Spurs wouldn't get that young star to rebuild around as they ascend to superstardom, they were about 5 years out from that. They would get a 2-time All-NBA talent in return for Leonard, who had made it abundantly clear that his tenure in San Antonio wouldn't last beyond 2019. Thus, instead of being sent home, Kawhi Leonard was deported. The official deal was Kawhi Leonard, Danny Green, and cash considerations to the Raptors in exchange for DeMar DeRozan, Toronto's 2019 first-round pick with a top 20 protection, and Jakob Poeltl. The move was a heist for Toronto off-rip in the eyes of some fans. The Raptors exponentially upgraded from DeMar to Kawhi, bringing in a key playoff-hardened contributor and champion in Danny Green, whilst also keeping all of their young assets in Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet. On top of all that, the biggest criticism was that Kawhi would just not report to the team, leaving the Raptors a weaker product without DeRozan or Leonard going into the next year. But even if that was the case and the team had a bad year, their protection of the pick would keep it in their hands. However, Leonard did report to the team, and he had the most revered season of his career. Although it was pretty plain that Leonard didn't want to be in Toronto, he was a professional all season and it benefited all parties. It quickly became clear that the Raptors, led by newly minted coach Nick Nurse, would be a serious threat in the East. The team tied with the Bucks for the best record in the league in the first half of the season and would boast a 17-5 record in the 22 games Leonard missed that year. The team would go all in, moving the longer-tenured Jonas Valanciunas and DeLon Wright to Memphis to acquire former DPOY and Grizzlies legend Marc Gasol, a trade that made the Raptors the league's best defense post-All-Star to pair with a top-5 offense. The team finished second in the East with a 58-win record, just too short of a franchise high. Kyle Lowry notched a 5th consecutive All-Star appearance, and Kawhi had a monster year of 26, 7, and 3, along with nearly 2 steals a night, finishing top 10 in both MVP and DPOY voting, while being honored to the All-NBA second team. Pascal Siakam would blossom into a star, winning Most Improved Player, and the second unit, featuring Serge Ibaka, Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, and Chris Boucher, would be heralded as one of the deepest defensive rosters in recent times. Jumping into the postseason, Toronto would dismiss Orlando in 5 games, before meeting a strong Philadelphia 76ers team with Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, and JJ Redick, even further boosted by the acquisition of Jimmy Butler. Against a balanced Sixers attack, Toronto's complementary pieces faltered offensively, and Kawhi picked up the slack to average 35 and 10 in what would become a career-defining series for the star. The series would go to 7, where it infamously ended, with Leonard achieving the first buzzer-beater Game 7 game winner in NBA history, sending the Raptors to their second Eastern Conference Finals in team history. In the conference finals, Toronto met the Bucks nearing the peak of their powers. Milwaukee was the first seed and had just put up a 60-win season led by the newly crowned MVP of the league, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Despite Lowry and Leonard combining for 61 in Game 1, the Raptors found themselves at a 2-0 deficit heading back to Toronto, and many believed that the impressive run was coming to a close. However, in a miracle of fate and manic defensive strategy from Nick Nurse, the Raptors would rifle off 4 consecutive wins behind key offensive contributions over the 4 games by Kawhi and Kyle to punch the team's first ticket to the NBA Finals. On the big stage, Toronto took advantage of a Dynasty Warriors team missing their cheat code weapon in Kevin Durant. Pascal Siakam made an impressive finals debut in Game 1 with 32, 8, and 5. The Warriors would respond in Game 2 before being routed by double digits in Games 3 and 4. This prompted Durant to return early from his injury in Game 5, where the Warriors would force a Game 6 at the cost of Durant's Achilles. Game 6 was shaping up to be another keystone performance for Klay Thompson to force a Game 7, despite a monumental start to the game from Kyle Lowry. Thompson would tear his ACL in the third quarter, just as Kawhi would go on a scoring tear, leaving Curry to push past the Raptors by himself offensively. The task wouldn't be enough, due in part to a breakout performance by Fred VanVleet on both sides of the ball, capped off by a 12-point fourth quarter where the undersized and undrafted guard went 3 of 5 from deep. Just like that, the perfect storm season was realized to its full potential. The Toronto Raptors became NBA champions for the first time, and 2019 would be a year etched in the memory of every basketball fan in Toronto, Greater Canada, and beyond. Of course, Kawhi would go on to leave for LA following the championship celebration. DeMar DeRozan's uneventful stint, paired with LaMarcus Aldridge in San Antonio, would come to a close after only 3 seasons, leading him to a career revival in Chicago and now back in the West with the Kings. Despite an impressive and legitimate effort during their title defense that was tarnished by the pandemic, the Raptors' championship core would decay in the seasons that followed. resulting in the team getting the 4th pick in the 2021 draft, their new franchise cornerstone, Scottie Barnes. They would even get Jakob Poeltl back in a Raptors uniform in 2023, where his role has exponentially evolved into the veteran starting center for a young and developing roster. The legacy of Toronto's sole championship has been complicated. Some dismiss it as an unearned victory due to Golden State's beaten-down roster by Series End. Some credit Leonard for sparking a new era of parity in the NBA, with there being no repeat champions since that Warriors era. Some believe Leonard's decision to walk away from the city that treated him as a superhero for a year has aged to be the worst decision in recent history. It would be the final NBA title bout that Kobe Bryant lived to see. But all things considered, who could have imagined that a fateful night of career-defining scoring by one of the league's greatest wings in 2006 would snowball into the deliverance of the association's first crowned champion outside of American borders? I guess that's just the magic of the NBA. Thank you for watching. Peace.